street cred, because it's the Portland culture, Antifa, and he ran for mayor earlier in the year. He took credit for it, and I watched that video, and I looked at it, and you don't have to like slow it down like frame by frame, but like I just picked up on the fact that he was not the one who knocked the guy out, somebody else did, revealing that the dude's completely pathetic. Not only is he a liar about a lot of things and a disruptor of many protests, right, which he did in the past, like that's like next level, like douchebaggery. And so for me, like, he was rude to me on a few occasions, acted like he cared about me, and he was actually just a very arrogant, dysfunctional drunk. So when I saw that, and I saw them popularizing, punching people in the face at the protests, I saw how that actually is negative. And that's what I told Willamette Week. That's the type of stuff that creates a cycle of violence, right? And so I made a YouTube video where I did my own analysis and showed that basically, he made it up. And then like somebody in the comment section on Willamette Week said, well, this guy, he's not a real Portlander. Sound like he was saying I'm not a real American. Another person said, I wonder what interest this guy has in this. Why would he do this to Jesse? Jesse responded to Willamette Week's, request for comment, saying, good job, Willamette Week. You just gave airtime to a cheesy conspiracy theorist, shaming essentially Willamette Week. And so in that little blurb, I told them, how I felt sensitive or concerned being half-half for my future in America, and how actually in Portland, Oregon, I dealt with a lot more discrimination than I have in the rest of the world. There's like a part of me that looks like a square. There's a part of me that people think as a cop because I have like an investigator energy to me. So it's not just necessarily racism from like the Portland crowd. It's the fact that they see me as and I'm not for violence. And I've criticized Antifa and megaphoned Antifa in the past for the Black Bloc, right? So there's a history that I have in Portland, Oregon, being a real contrarian, being outside the box, right? Which again was the name of my show in Portland, Oregon for many, many years. Outside the Box TV. Started out in cable access. Now that was a deep connection to people. That was a different society. And back in 2003, there were protests in Portland, Oregon. There wasn't really a sense of community that I felt with the protest crowd ever, but that time, space, reality, right? Analog TV, having the access to cable access, and the internet being new, it was a combination of elements that contributed to people being more empathetic and receptive to somebody that had intelligence. Now, in 2026, 21, 22, 23, 24 years later, and those were decent times in Portland, Oregon, despite the war. Those were the best times in Portland, Oregon for me. Despite the war in Afghanistan and Iraq beginning, those were the best times for me in Portland, Oregon. As far as my connection to other people, I felt respected. Wasn't really welcome into people's homes, but it did happen a few times. I was actually welcomed into in Southeast Hawthorne. They were gathering together at somebody's house, or a place where there were just a bunch of older white men, working professionals that wanted to hear somebody's unique take on 9/11. They weren't convinced. They had their own questions, and I was left disappointed. I felt kind of ambushed. But people back in that time period before our current day and age were far more receptive to normal, healthy human conversation and debate. There was the 9/11 group at Laughing Horse Bookstore. There was that sense of community that I found there. As people would talk about the books that they were reading, also some weird folks as well. But here we are in 2026. No meetups here. Somewhere else, right? We just saw the strike in Iran. There were protests, but there weren't massive protests like you would see in Portland, Oregon, or some of these places. You had protests with like a lot of Iranians, some of them supporting the strikes, some of them not supporting the strikes, but ultimately, the reality of looking at the comment sections and seeing people basically calling for them to be rounded up just because they're protesting. So that's basically the nature of the people here. a lot of them that grew up in this environment that have been damaged by the military-industrial complex media, they don't have a history of organic anti-war activism and basically being contrarians with regards to the military-industrial complex. Like, they're living under the umbrella of the military-industrial complex and the energy that it brings. And then you have just the whole reality of the Metroplex having so many people within it that are employed by the military-industrial complex. That's how they have their money for their multi-$1,000 apartment. There's lots of different system jobs in the Dallas, Texas area, so it's a completely different culture. Okay, and so as an empath, as someone that has certain psychic abilities, like I had a dream before the terror attack actually, I can pick up on the negative energy, on the lack of community, on how we're barreling towards this anti-human reality. And so there are many Muslims right now that are living in fear. Maybe people from India as well, right? There's like basically a backlash, and this is what I predicted. This is what I said we would see as we would see the solar maximum period. More racism. I knew that it was just a break in the programming. I call it the switch programming, for those that don't know. Right? So when we dealt with 2019, 2020, there was some intense solar activity and eclipses that did cause people to act out and caused me to quit the internet. But then we went into the minimum. Now keep in mind, most of you don't know the George Floyd protests kicked off within 24 hours of a monster solar flare that was the largest of that cycle for that time. So there was a solar influence over the unrest that we saw. Also, I believe that the comet was influencing the unrest. That would be including the right-wingers that were, involved in their own protests, in the ramp up to January 6th. But that period there generally is described as the minimum, right? From 2016, 17, 18, 19, all the way up until like 2021 or so, give or take a few years. I'm just guesstimating, right? Every 11 years, 9 to 13 years, average of 11, there's a peak in solar activity and then a dip down. And Burrell Payne noted that wars tend to begin before the solar cycle ramps up and after the solar cycle ramps up, right? So that's where we are right now. We are in 2026 and we're positioned to experience another war. And right on cue, February 28th, 2026, Iran is attacked. Okay, and they're saying that it's going to take place for at least 4 or 5 weeks, but this is already starting to spill out into other regions, into Lebanon, into Dubai, into Saudi Arabia, into Qatar. I think I've read like 5, 6, 7 other countries are already involved. And that is going to lead to this just increased generalization of hatred within this region. Okay, so the devil's biggest trick is convincing us he doesn't exist, and that is the biggest trick of a lot of people in this world, that just because they're not part of the right wing, they're acting like they're not part of the problem. And it's like that song from Pink Floyd, On the Turning Away. It is convenient for a lot of journalists to take my concerns and view them as conspiracy theorists or conspiracy theories, or for other people on the right wing to think that I'm anti-white. Like, these are different types of psychological dysfunctions, mind you, from the same culture that is perpetuating these endless wars. So people would say, well, there's a left and a right. There's only a perception of a left and a right. When it comes to what's taking place with these wars and the funding for what's taking place, there is no left or right. There is one system. There is one steel-toe boot stepping on the face of the third world forever. That's what's taking place here. So you have people actually, in conclusion, they don't realize that they are their own greatest enemies. They project onto everybody else of the own other political observations of the other political groups, but on the left and the right, they are their own worst enemy. The common theme here is the refusal to take responsibility and accountability for their role in this, for the role of people that they voted for in this. It is about the refusal to be self-responsible. It is about the the lack of gratitude that they have certain privileges in this world, especially certain journalists, people in positions of influence, that they right now, in these potential last days that we're in of the United States, they could actually do something with their privilege to actually help out somebody or give a voice to the voiceless. And in fact, in my 20 years of doing what I'm doing, society has never been colder and crueler. And they're happy about it. They are not remorseful about what they're doing. So there is no real opposition to what Trump is doing, what some people see as the Antichrist or the Dajjal. And I do these talks out here, out in the open, where people can hear me as they go back and forth. And back in Portland, back in the day, some people would actually stop and listen. Some people would actually be surprised to hear me say that society's like that. They're not like that here. They may act and dress like they're a liberal. They may have the LGBTQ like front going, virtue signaling, the we're not with him, like sort of a thing. But from the metaphysics of what's going on, from the unseen realms, there is no difference. There is no left or right. They are with him in spirit. And they created the causes and conditions for him to come to power. Okay, that's the truth. Through the military-industrial complex, look at all these different people that have been sucked into the idea of the military when they're people of color. It was normal for them, right, to go overseas and subjugate other populations. And there's many of them now that are being affected by ICE, either them directly or their wives. And they can't figure it out because they were never against injustice. And now it's happening to them. They were never on page one. They were on another page. Why is this happening to me? I was one of your servants. They don't understand how evil works. And evil will turn on its own. In time, evil will be consumed. It just takes some time. And for some people, it takes until the afterlife. And it doesn't happen in this lifetime. And why is that? Because we're being given by God in this lifetime enough rope to hang ourselves. We're being tested. And so, because a lot of people haven't seen karma in their lifetimes, there are people that are 75, 85, 95, 100 that have no shame whatsoever for the evil that they've done to others, to their children. I see this in my parents. I see this in others. I see this in a lot of racist elderly people. So, while I associate becoming elderly with becoming wiser and becoming enlightened and coming closer to God, I'm in kind of like a dark side parallel reality where they're coming closer and closer to evil in many, many cases. And being very unapologetic about it, as if it is its own spirituality. And that's what we're dealing with. We are dealing with basically the rise in a false idol system that many people are worshiping as God. The system right now, in which they've admitted that this war in Iran is meant to trigger Armageddon. Like that they're actually trying to bring that on intentionally. And so years and years of 20 years of warning about these things are continuing to manifest. And so things are going to change real quickly here. And with that, we're going to wake up one day where people are just screaming to murder anybody who looks like me. They'll just be screaming from the mountaintops, kill, 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 kill. And no one will care because that's their training as good Americans, to not have any compassion whatsoever for the people that are literally going to be just slaughtered. So, you really ought to ask yourselves, these aliens that people have been talking about, are we really talking about something that's outside of ourselves? Are we really talking about spaceships here when people talk about, this alien invasion and this alien agenda? Because that's not how I'm reading into it. I'm reading into this whole movement itself being a front for a dark agenda. When you're talking about getting rid of billions of people, deporting them to certain countries, and then those people being nuked, and then you have people that are faced with this truth that have no feeling, these people are under the control of demons. And so we will continue to talk about the spiritual war that is taking place. Thank you for watching, and I highly encourage somebody out there to consider my words, to consider helping me, to consider interviewing me, to consider relocating me. Bye.